My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am 46 years old, and I come from Manchester, though I have not lived there for a very long time. For the past 20 years, I have worked as a personal assistant to one of the most respected women in London, Mrs. Margaret Lang. When I first started, I was 26 and still believed that hard work and loyalty were enough to build a good life. I had no big dreams for myself, no great plans. All I wanted was stability. My father used to say that if a person works quietly and does what she's told, she will never go hungry. I suppose I believed him because that is what I did. Mrs. Lang was already famous when I joined her. She ran an art foundation that supported young painters and sculptors. Her name was often in the newspapers, always beside some new charity event or exhibition. She had a strong voice and perfect posture. People said she was brilliant and cold, and I found both to be true. She could make a room fall silent with one look, and I learned quickly that silence was often safer than speaking. I moved into the small staff flat above her office, the one we all called the room upstairs. It had one window and a single bed. From there, I could see the roofs of London and sometimes at night, the yellow lights of passing trains. It was supposed to be temporary. I told myself I would stay there for a few months, just until I found a proper apartment. But months became years, and soon the room upstairs became the whole world I knew. Mrs. Lang trusted me with everything. I organized her travel, her appointments, her correspondence, even her birthday parties, which she always said she disliked but never failed to host. She rarely said thank you, but she never had to. I told myself that her approval was in her silence. When she didn't correct me, I knew I had done well. I never married. There was a man once, Daniel, a quiet teacher who lived across the street from my mother's house. We wrote to each other for a while when I moved to London. His letters were kind and full of small stories from home, but I often forgot to reply. There was always something to do for Mrs. Lang, some new project or sudden change of plan. After a few months, the letters stopped coming, and I folded the last one into a drawer beside my bed. Time passed in the slow, organized rhythm of someone else's life. My days began with coffee and ended with lists. Sometimes, in the middle of the afternoon, I caught myself wondering what my own life might have been if I had made different choices. But I never allowed the thought to stay long. There was always an email to answer, a file to prepare, a schedule to perfect. Mrs. Lang was not unkind, at least not in her own way. She expected discipline from herself as much as from others. I admired her. Perhaps I even loved her, though not in any romantic sense. It was something quieter, a kind of devotion that comes from being near someone powerful and believing their world is better than yours. Every Friday, I stayed late to prepare reports for the following week. The building would grow empty, and the sounds of the city outside would fade to a distant hum. From my small desk near her office door, I could sometimes hear Mrs. Lang moving inside. Soft steps, the click of her pen, the sound of papers being turned. I never interrupted her. I simply waited until she said good night. One Friday evening, she called my name without warning. Her voice was calm but tired. "Eleanor, could you come in for a moment?" I walked into her office and found her sitting by the window, looking at the street below. The light was fading, and her reflection trembled faintly in the glass. She asked me to sit. That was rare. Usually, I stood while we spoke. She told me she had been offered a position in New York, something large and important, a partnership with one of the city's top galleries. She said she would need to leave within the month. I waited for her to say she wanted me to go with her, but she didn't. She only said that it would be a new chapter and that I should begin preparing her files for transfer. That night, I went back to the room upstairs and sat on my bed for a long time. It was quiet except for the sound of rain against the window. I realized, for the first time, that I had nowhere else to go. My whole life had become the shape of someone else's needs. In the following weeks, I packed her things and watched the walls of her office grow bare. She thanked me once, quickly, almost out of habit. On her last day, she left early for a dinner, and when I came in the next morning, her desk was empty. There was a short note in her handwriting. "Eleanor, thank you for everything. Please contact Mr. Green for your final arrangements." That was all. I stayed in the office building for another month, finishing small tasks and keeping the place in order until the new director arrived. Then I left. I didn't go home to Manchester. My mother had passed away years before, and the house had been sold. I found a small apartment in South London near the river and began working part-time for a small travel company. The work was easy, the people friendly, but I often found myself missing the quiet order of Mrs. Lang's world. Sometimes I walked past the old office building and looked up at the top window, the room upstairs. It was still there, the curtains drawn, the light gone. I often wondered who was sleeping in that room now, and whether they knew what kind of life could disappear inside it. A few months ago, I received a letter. The envelope was heavy, the handwriting precise. It was from Mrs. Lang. She wrote that she was returning to London for a short time and would like to see me, if convenient. The phrase made me smile a little. Everything about her was always so formal, even after all these years. She asked me to visit her at her country house in Kent, a place I had only heard about but never seen. The invitation felt like a test, though I wasn't sure what kind. I hesitated for days before replying, and when I finally did, I wrote that I would come the following weekend. I don't know exactly why I said yes. Perhaps I wanted to see her again, or perhaps I simply wanted to understand why she wanted to see me. It had been nearly 5 years since we last spoke. Now the weekend is almost here. I've packed a small bag and ironed my best blouse. The train ticket is folded neatly in my purse. It's strange to think that after all this time, I will walk into her world again older, quieter, no longer the same woman who once believed that service was enough to make a life complete. And yet, part of me is afraid, because I know that when I see her again, in that large house full of old memories, I will have to face something I've been avoiding for years. The truth about what I gave up. and the question that still waits for me in that silent room upstairs. Before I continue with the story, please like, subscribe, share, and let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now, let's continue. The train to Kent was quiet that morning. I sat by the window and watched the city fall away into fields and empty skies. It had been years since I had left London for anything other than work, and something about the green countryside felt both peaceful and strange. I held the envelope from Mrs. Lang on my lap and read her words again. "It would be pleasant to see you, if convenient." I arrived at a small station where a driver was waiting for me. He held a sign with my name and spoke in a polite voice. "Mrs. Lang asked me to collect you, Miss Hayes." His accent was local, soft, and he seemed used to silence. We drove for nearly an hour through narrow country roads lined with tall hedges and sleeping trees. When the car finally stopped, I saw the house. It was larger than I had imagined. Pale stone walls, tall windows, a garden that seemed to stretch into the hills. It was beautiful, but not warm. The kind of house built to impress, not to comfort. The driver carried my small bag to the front steps, then left quietly. A woman opened the door. She was younger than me, maybe 30, dressed in a dark uniform. "Good afternoon," she said kindly. "Mrs. Lang is expecting you. Please come in." She led me through a wide hallway with a marble floor that echoed faintly under my shoes. There were paintings on the walls, modern and expensive, but their colors felt cold. When Mrs. Lang appeared, she looked exactly as I remembered her, tall, perfectly dressed, every movement graceful and certain. Only her hair had changed. It was silver now, not gold. But her voice, when she spoke, was the same steady sound I had once listened to every day. "Eleanor," she said, and gave a small smile. "It's been too long." I felt unsure of what to do. I smiled back, said her name, and waited for her to lead the conversation. She asked about my work, my health, where I was living now. Her questions were kind but distant, as if she were reading from a polite list. We had tea in the garden room. The walls were glass, and the afternoon light poured through them, soft and golden. For a while, we talked about the old days at the foundation, projects, exhibitions, the people who used to come and go. I tried to sound cheerful, but every memory seemed to open another space inside me, a space I had been keeping closed. "You were always dependable," she said after a long silence. "I could trust you more than anyone." It was meant as praise, but it felt like a line from a report. I smiled and said, "Thank you, Mrs. Lang." She looked at me for a moment, then shook her head slightly. "Margaret," she said. "You can call me Margaret now." It surprised me. In all the years I had worked for her, she had never asked that. But the word didn't come easily to my mouth. "All right," I said quietly, though I wasn't sure I would use it. Later, she gave me a short tour of the house. The rooms were large and beautifully arranged, every detail exact. In one corner stood a piano, covered with photographs. She paused there and pointed to one picture. It showed a young man in his 20s with dark hair and a bright smile. "My son Henry," she said. "He's studying in Paris now. Architecture." I had heard about him before, long ago. He was only a boy when I worked for her. I remembered his small voice on the phone sometimes, asking for his mother while she was in meetings. I had often told him, "She'll call you soon," though I knew she might not. "He's grown," I said softly. "Yes," she replied. "And very independent. Sometimes too much." She smiled faintly, but there was something sad in her eyes. When the tour was finished, she told the housekeeper to show me to the guest room. It was upstairs, at the end of a long corridor filled with the scent of lavender. The room was bright and quiet, with a wide bed and a window that looked over the garden. I placed my bag on the chair and sat down for a moment. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock somewhere nearby. It reminded me of the small flat above her office, the room upstairs. How many nights I had sat there working late, listening to that same kind of quiet. It felt almost like being back inside a memory I had never escaped. That evening, we had dinner together, a simple meal served by candlelight. She asked about my life again, and this time her voice softened a little. She wanted to know why I never married, whether I had family nearby. I told her I didn't. She looked thoughtful for a long moment. "I often wondered," she said finally. "You were always there, and yet I never really knew you." I didn't know how to answer. I smiled politely and said, "There wasn't much to know." But her words stayed with me. After dinner, she excused herself, saying she was tired. I returned to my room. The house was quiet now, only the faint sound of wind outside the window. I took off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed. I could see the reflection of the garden lights on the glass. It was then that I noticed something strange. On the opposite wall was a closed door, painted the same color as the wallpaper. I hadn't seen it before. I stood up and went closer. It wasn't locked, only slightly stiff from disuse. When I opened it, I saw a narrow staircase leading upward. A small lamp on the wall gave off a dim glow. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of dust and paper. At the top of the stairs was another door, and behind it, a small room. It was empty except for a chair, a desk, and a box of old files. On the wall hung a single painting, half covered with cloth. I pulled the cloth aside and saw a portrait of Mrs. Lang, painted years ago. She looked younger, her eyes bright and distant, her expression full of confidence. But beside her in the painting, almost hidden in the background, was another figure. A woman, standing slightly behind her, hands folded neatly. Me. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't remember the artist painting it. Perhaps it had been from one of the exhibitions, or maybe it had been a private commission. Either way, I had never seen it before. There I was, small, quiet, almost invisible. The perfect assistant. The background of someone else's life. I felt something rise in my chest then, something that had no name. It wasn't anger, not exactly, but a deep ache. A kind of recognition that after all these years, that was how I would always exist in her world. Present, but unseen. I closed the cloth over the painting and went back down the stairs. When I reached my room again, I sat by the window until the moon came out. I thought about my life, the long years of quiet service, the missed chances, the letters unanswered, and I wondered if Mrs. Lang had ever once thought of me as more than a pair of steady hands. As I turned off the lamp, I decided that tomorrow I would ask her why she had invited me. I wanted to hear her reason, even if it was something small, because if I didn't, I knew I would carry that silence for the rest of my life. When I woke the next morning, the house was still. The sky outside was pale and heavy with mist. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the folded note on the bedside table. It was written in Mrs. Lang's handwriting, small and exact. She said she would be in her study after breakfast if I wished to see her. I dressed slowly. My hands trembled a little, though I wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was because of the painting upstairs. The image of it had stayed with me through the night, appearing each time I closed my eyes. That quiet version of myself, always behind someone else, frozen in a life that never quite belonged to her. When I went downstairs, the young housekeeper brought me tea and toast. She was cheerful, her voice bright and quick. She told me she had worked for Mrs. Lang for 3 years. I asked if she liked it here. She smiled politely and said yes, of course, though there was a shadow in her expression that I recognized at once. It was the same kind of quiet I had once carried. After breakfast, I went to the study. Mrs. Lang was sitting by the window again, a cup of coffee beside her. Papers were spread neatly across the desk, and a vase of white lilies stood in the corner. She looked calm. But when she saw me, her expression softened a little. She asked if I had slept well. I told her yes, though it wasn't true. She said she hoped I found the house comfortable. Then, as if remembering something distant, she looked toward the ceiling for a moment, as though she could see the small room above us through the walls. "This house," she said, "was built by my grandfather. Every room has a purpose, even the one upstairs." Her words made my chest tighten. I waited for her to say more, but she didn't. I told her quietly that I had found the staircase and gone up there last night. She didn't seem surprised. She asked what I thought of the room. I said it was peaceful. Then I told her about the painting. Her hands stopped moving. She looked at me for a long time before speaking again. "I asked a student to paint it years ago," she said. "He admired you, you know. Said your presence gave balance to the picture." Balance. That was the word she used. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I told her it was strange to see myself there after all this time. She nodded slowly, as if she understood. Then she said something I didn't expect. She said she often thought about me after she left London. She wondered whether she had been fair, whether she had asked too much. At first, I thought she was being polite, but her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "I used to believe," she said, "that a person's value was in what they could give. Work, effort, loyalty. But now I see that I took too much from people like you, Eleanor. You gave me your years, and I never even asked who you were when you went home at night." Her words were quiet, but they struck deeply. I didn't know what to say. For years, I had told myself that she never thought of me at all. Now, hearing this, I felt both comforted and hurt, because part of me still wanted her to see me as more than someone who had simply done her job well. I told her that I had always admired her, that I had learned everything I knew about work and patience from watching her. She smiled faintly and said that patience could be a kind of prison if one stayed inside it too long. Then she asked what I planned to do with the rest of my life. I laughed softly and said I hadn't thought about it. It was true. I had been living day by day without any clear picture of the future. She said I should think about it now, while there was still time. We spoke for a while longer, mostly about ordinary things. But behind every word, there was a weight, an unspoken sadness about all the years that had passed between us. When I stood to leave, she reached out her hand. It was the first time she had ever done that. Her fingers were thin and cool, but her grip was steady. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wanted to see you again before I moved abroad." "Abroad?" I asked. She nodded. "Henry has invited me to live near him in France. I think it's time." I said I was glad for her, and I meant it. There was peace in her face, the kind that comes when a person has finally put down the weight they have carried too long. I went upstairs to pack my things. Before closing my suitcase, I walked once more to the hidden door. The air on the staircase was cool and dry. I opened the door to the small room and looked around. The chair, the desk, the covered painting, all exactly as I had left them. I walked to the window. From there, I could see the garden below, the long path leading to the trees. I thought about all the years I had spent following paths that were never truly mine. I took one last look at the painting. This time, I didn't uncover it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it showed. Then I closed the door gently and went back down. Mrs. Lang was waiting by the car. The driver placed my bag in the trunk, and she walked me to the gate. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said she hoped I would visit again someday. I said I would, though we both knew that day might never come. As the car drove away, I looked back through the rear window. She was standing there in her pale coat, small against the wide house behind her. She raised one hand in a quiet farewell. The image stayed with me until the trees hid her from view. The journey back to London felt longer than before. The fields outside the window passed slowly, each one pale under the afternoon sky. I thought about what she had said, about patience being a kind of prison. I wondered if that was what my life had been: patient, careful, and full of waiting for something that never arrived. When I reached my flat, the air felt different. The rooms were small and simple, but they belonged entirely to me. I made tea and sat by the window, looking at the narrow street below. People were walking home from work, talking, laughing. I hadn't noticed before how full of sound the world was when you let it in. In the days that followed, I began to do small things I had never done before. I took long walks by the river. I went to a museum alone and stayed for hours, not because I had to take notes, but because I wanted to. I even wrote a letter to Daniel, the man from years ago, though I never sent it. It wasn't really for him. It was for me, a way of saying that I still remembered who I had been before all the silence. Sometimes, when I wake at night, I think of the room upstairs. I imagine it empty, full of quiet light. I don't feel trapped by it anymore. It's like a picture in my mind, one I can look at without pain. I used to believe that my worth was in how well I could serve others. Now I understand something else, that loyalty without love becomes habit, and habit without purpose becomes a kind of sleep. I had been asleep for a long time, but waking, even late, is still waking. I don't know if I will ever see Mrs. Lang again. Perhaps she will send a postcard from France, or perhaps she won't. It doesn't matter. What matters is that, at last, I can stand outside her shadow and see the world in my own light. When I look in the mirror now, I see someone older, yes, but also someone still capable of beginning again. And that, I think, is enough. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share.